What do you get when you combine the gameplay from 1996's Quake with the 2D sprites from 1993's Doom, and then sprinkle some classic enemies from Warhammer 40,000's back catalogue all over the top? You get Boltgun, a blast of pure retro first-person shooter nostalgia that exploded onto the scene like a vortex grenade back in 2023. With Boltgun 2 either on its way or here by the time you watch this, and the almost certainty that Boltgun 1 is going to be heavily discounted in the lead up to it, let's have a look and see what the original is like and whether it's still worth your time. Full disclosure, I was given a key to this game by one of the co-founders at Olden Demon, and while I am not known for my PC game reviewing talents, I'll do my best. But if I make a big whoopsie and loot the MOBA while grinding an RNG whale, you're just gonna have to bear with me while I get a mop to clean up the mess. So, is Boltgun still worth your time? Will you enjoy it if you don't play Warhammer? And do I have the reflexes to play a fast-paced Twitch shooter in this day and age? No, I'm old. I can just about reach the toilet when I wake up at 3 in the morning 9 times out of 10. What more do you want from me? When I was looking up how to describe this game, I learned that it is a boomer shooter. I'm not sure why that is, considering the boomer generation is from 1946 to 1964 and Quake was released 30 years later, so this might just be something to do with the falling standards of math amongst the young. But the elevator pitch is simple. It's a 90s styled first-person shooter, only for Warhammer. What Boltgun is trying to do here isn't entirely original. There are various other retro shooters like 2018's Dust, 2019's Amid Evil, 2023's Hrot, and no doubt more hiding away in the background. But due to the reach with the IP in question, I imagine this was new to a lot of people and certainly new to me. However, I try to avoid all forms of media other than 90s era White Dwarf magazine and the occasional episode of LOLO.
Good morning. Good morning.
Olden Demon have had the clever idea to take this style of game and mix it with an existing license so as to open it up to a wider potential audience. Like mixing Pogs and the Pokemon. But is there a good game behind this stylish facade? Is Boltgun just all spit and no gag? So how does it play? Well, you start off with a small exposition, then in no time you are down on a planet, your drop pod is broken, and the remainder of your veteran squad are dead. Luckily, after about a minute of wandering around cutting people in two with your chainsword, you find the aforementioned Boltgun and can then go on your magical mystery tour of 24 levels of carnage split into 3 chapters. The levels of violence here are Carmageddon-esque, the kind that would warrant an 18 rating and a parent's advisory notice from school if this was back in the 90s. Each mission was around 20 to 25 minutes for me, and after around 10 hours I had completed the main game and moved on to the Forges of Corruption DLC. The gameplay is fairly standard. You have some health indicated by the larger health pickups and the smaller red helixes. Meanwhile, your armor is contempt, quite literally. Larger pickups of contempt are the floating storm shields, and the smaller ones are the spinning armor icons with purity seals on. Enemies will drop these on death, and this game will throw both of these at you along with ammo and grenades until you can't take it anymore. So feel free to just unload your arsenal on anyone nearby with wild abandon. There isn't much of an in-game tutorial, and the action happens so quickly you might just breeze through the first few levels before you really understand what's going on mechanically. Your ranged weapons are best matched against the many different enemy types. The interface will show you the strength of the weapon you are holding and suggest you match it to the toughness of the enemy that you are facing. To gain a damage bonus, you want a strength that is higher than your enemy's toughness, but you deal maximum damage if your strength is double the enemy toughness. This system also works inversely, so a weapon that is a lower strength will result in less damage to enemies. You can see this in real time as the top of your screen has a nice little indicator as to if you are doing increased or decreased damage. It's all very much close to the 40k rule set in fact, which is good in theory, but in practice the range, reload speed and damage per second of these weapons means the reality is very different. The Vengeance launcher, bemoaned by many, is actually great at killing Terminators and Blight Drones from a distance, despite the game telling you it should be fairly crap. Different enemy types have unique mechanics. Pink horrors split into 2 blue horrors upon death. Nurglings are incredibly fast and throw projectiles faster than most enemy bullets. Chaos Space Marines, meanwhile, throw grenades that need to be dodged. Aspiring champions need to be exploded before they can trigger their death animation and be reborn with extra health, damage and speed. And the greater demons cycle through a few different attack modes. There are some hidden power-ups that give you a limited time infinite ammo or more damage, and mechanically speaking, that's pretty much it. But this isn't just some cheap nostalgia cash-in. Overwatch Digital have absolutely committed to the gag here. You have a stun and charge function combined with a chainsword that results in the kinds of bloody explosions that, had this been the 90s, would have tabloids yelling to ban this sick filth. Yet in today's eyes, it just looks quaint. You have a taunt button that allows you to drop a few lines of Imperial truth and draw enemies out towards you, but you could be forgiven for leaving it unused. You are followed around by a servo skull who will provide endless grimdark quips that you will mostly miss as the action is so fast-paced. You can even choose the level of pixelation in the game to really match your preferred era of graphical fidelity. If you played Quake back in the day, you will get a kick out of this, and even if you haven't, the novelty of piloting a first-person protagonist who moves at twice the speed of Usain Bolt while being armed and armoured like a battleship is a breath of fresh air around a meta of po-faced single-player games competing to be the most angsty and dark possible. While other games are slowly taking you through a 6-hour tutorial that prepares you for the 200-hour plus open world you need to explore, Boltgun hands you several weapons and commands you to turn its maps into an explosion of strawberry jam within the first few seconds. If the Nintendo Zapper Gun was still a thing, you bet there would be an expansion that allowed you to wander around the levels on rails, blasting enemies while holding an actual plastic bolt gun. It's also good for the connoisseur as well. I enjoyed playing a Spot the Reference style subgame with the 2012 Dark Vengeance cultists mixed in with Forge World's Plague Toad sculpts popping up. There is a gender-swapped version of the Erasmus Carter Volanus limited edition miniature that gives you the briefing between levels. And while you don't have to get the joke to enjoy the game, when D-Rock started playing in the ending credits, it did earn a "oh, very clever" from me for the reference. However, there is a good reason why Half-Life, Halo and online multiplayer gaming came out at the end of the 90s to sweep away the sea of Quake clones into the sea. Boltgun's absolute commitment to the bit does have a few flaws. But I'll tell you what doesn't have any flaws: signing up for my Ko-fi account. At the gold tier, you can see your name in lights on the pages here, as well as having a look behind the scenes into various upcoming projects for the channel. We also have a retro painting competition that happens every year, if you indeed fancy getting out your old pots of Goblin Green to indulge yourself. But enough paying the bills, what else should you know about Boltgun? As you might expect, sometimes the way Grandad did it isn't the way you should do it. The story is so light it makes Duke Nukem look like Othello. There is no multiplayer, there is no co-op. Aside from the progression of completing the game on higher difficulty levels and hunting down the locations of the secret power-ups, there is minimal replayability. The enemy's AI and pathfinding is erratic, and more than once I was able to hide from a larger enemy and pile a dozen shots into its leg or other extremity to put it down. There is no map, and the levels are so confusing that the game was patched to include a waypoint system triggered by hitting the N key. And thank goodness for that, because there is nothing worse than wandering around one of these maps after defeating all the enemies, trying to find the way to the next area. This is especially relevant during the stage where you are trapped walking through the loop of a chaos dimension that flips 90 degrees unless you can get to the specific door to continue. There are also minor issues like the secrets you can find throughout the level triggering various power-ups, but the nature of them means that by the time you have found them, most of the enemies nearby are dead anyway. The enemies seem unbalanced thematically speaking. Chaos Terminators aren't too much of a hassle to deal with, but those Nurglings and Chaos Toads are an absolute pain. Enemies can't hear you, but react instantly if you wander into their line of sight. And on PC, using the scroll wheel to try and find the right weapon for the right opponent during a frantic melee is a recipe for frustration. But I think the biggest complaint that I have is that the game doesn't really do anything new. You can tell there is an element of graphics polish and game feel to it that really separates it from the kind of games that used to fit on a floppy disk. But if you don't have a connection to the Warhammer IP, nothing here really elevates the game to an extra level. And I feel bad saying this, because the game almost defies the ability to objectively review it, because a lot of its character blurs the line in between feature and bug. Disliking the game on these grounds is a bit like me buying a sausage roll from Greggs and then complaining it hasn't turned itself into fine dining as I walk myself to the park bench. Boltgun is at its best when you are running and gunning through waves of teleporting enemies, and Boltgun is at its worst when you catch a larger boss on a piece of scenery and slowly chip them to death with a single weapon while they just stand there making funny noises. While the game does surprise you with a few extra enemies that you weren't expecting and a few specialist encounters that slightly diverge from the core gameplay mechanic, for the most part it's a loop of going into a room and shooting at everyone in that room, then finding a key that opens a door so you can enter another room to shoot everyone in that room, and then continuing this over and over again. There are purge events where you will have a large open area where enemies will spawn for a few minutes until you defeat them all. Every hour or so you get a new enemy or a new weapon, and everything just kind of compiles in on that. 10 or so levels into the game, I was starting to look at how long I played, and I was asking myself if I really wanted to continue. Luckily, at the last level in Chapter 2, the game really ramps up the difficulty level. And in a stroke of luck for me, at that time, I had just discovered the sprint key, namely the way to toggle the sprint feature on and off, which really does help the game provide the extra level of challenge that kept me hooked until the end. After completing the main campaign, I started on the DLC, which ramps the difficulty up further still and adds a couple of new weapons and a few new enemy types. Terminators with lightning claws, Chaos Havocs with missile launchers, Chaos Space Marines with plasma guns, and Heldroots plural. I'd say the DLC levels are some of my favourite of the game, as they generally dispense with the chasing down corridors to access keys part to make room for the truly massive arenas to host the purge events. The final level of the DLC is very hard even on normal, especially if you, like me, hadn't learnt that shooting the servo skulls or interacting with certain walls accesses the best secret abilities. However, eventually I did indeed get the power up and win the game, after murdering most of Abaddon's Black Legion and more greater demons than the Grey Knights during the first War for Armageddon. The DLC's Horde mode was fun, although I only played it once, and once I'd found the room that you could sit in and pile shots into the waves of enemies that you were set against, I felt I had seen all the game had to offer. Mind you, I was around 15 or so hours into it at this point. Not every game needs to last for triple-digit hours, and some games like Boltgun are best left short and sweet. Take it from someone who has made nostalgia their bread and butter. There is going to be an audience out there that will crowd around this like a jazz mag behind the bike sheds. However, nostalgia is a fickle beast. Once you have got the dopamine hit, most of the time people don't need or want another. There is a good reason why we don't have monopose plastic space marines and cardboard terrain anymore, and Boltgun does come unstuck in a few areas. Despite this, the core gameplay is great, harmless, mindless, carnal fun that shines at a high difficulty level. And ultimately this is a better game than just replaying Doom or Quake 2 or any of that ilk from the 90s. The full retail price for this game is currently £18.99 on Steam. Do people still buy 3-year-old games at full retail price? I'm not sure. If you want to wait, then the lowest price this game has ever been at the time of me recording this is £7.50 $59, which is an absolute steal. The DLC Forges of Corruption offers around 5 additional hours of content and 2 new weapon types, and is a must-buy at £4.99 if you've already completed the main game. This feels like the kind of game that would be absolutely perfect on the Steam Deck or via Switch. However, there are a number of reviews that complain about the performance on the Switch platform. In conclusion, would I make changes to this game? Yes. At the very least, some kind of quick access weapon wheel for switching weapons and grenade types, upgradable weapons and abilities, more varied achievements that allow me to spend achievement points to unlock extra weapons for future runs, a new game plus feature that allows you to swap out some of the weapons. I'd also split the episodes up to add unique enemies into each of them, and then end each chapter with a boss battle with special unique mechanics. It's not like the Faction of Chaos hasn't got a huge list of models that they could draw from in the decades of releases for 40k and Epic. A boss battle against a Lord of Skulls, a Brass Scorpion, or even a giant Silver Tower or Chaos Warhound would be absolutely great. But if I made those changes, I'd risk losing sight of the original design brief and turning it into something else completely. Sometimes all you want is a Greg's sausage roll. Sometimes nothing else will do, and that's why this video is sponsored by Greg. No, it's not. It's not sponsored by Greg's. Did you know they have Greg's drive-thrus now? That's insane. What's happening to this world? Anyway, I'll leave you with that thought. Please subscribe for more content, and I'll see you next time.